Hello, everyone, and welcome into this episode of the Bear Down Buzz podcast. As usual, myself, Eli, joined by Joe and Isaac. And this is our first off-season episode, so to speak. And, for as unfortunate as this Bears season was, it did end off on a pretty high note, defeating the Green Bay Packers in the final moments of that game, finally snapping that 11 or 12 game losing streak to the Green Bay Packers. And Joe, you can start us off. What were some of your takeaways? And, more importantly, how great does it feel to finally get the Green Bay monkey offer back?
I I'm happy that we won. I feel really good about it. But also, I do want to say that it's not as I mean, it's a big win, but it's not as big as a win as some people might want to make it out to be. Because we didn't beat their starting offense. Jordan Love got hurt in the second quarter. So did Christian Watson. He ended up tearing his ACL and will be out the rest of the season. And then they took Josh Jacobs out once those two guys got hurt. So we were playing Malik Willis and a bunch of second, third string wide receivers, because Romeo Dobbs was also not playing because he was sick. Um, I mean, their starting defense, I think, was out there most of the game. At least the guys that weren't hurt. I think they were playing most of their starters. Um, and going into the game and going into the last couple games, Matt LaFleur was pounding into the media like we need to play a clean game. And obviously the Packers didn't play a clean game at all on Sunday, but they didn't look good at all. Uh, and we beat them, but we almost lost because we fumbled. It's hilarious. The commentator said, "Oh, the Bears going to lose." Almost basically said, "How are the Bears going to lose this game?" And then right after that, they fumbled, and we almost lost because we fumbled. But Caleb ended up giving us one of those clutch drives. We actually ended up managing the clock correctly for once, which is surprising. Um, which is one thing I can take away is it took us 18 weeks, but we learned how to manage the clock. Maybe, although we're gonna have a different head coach now, so maybe that doesn't matter. But also, it seemed like Caleb actually had reign to call timeouts because I think he called a couple during that game. Uh, so that's good to see. But yeah, I mean, happy that we won. Again, I'm not gonna put too much stock into beating the Green Bay because they were playing their backups at least on offense. But maybe now going forward, I don't have to say I'm not gonna pick the Bears to beat Green Bay because they haven't beat Green Bay. I can actually pick the Bears to win. Uh, and also we probably should beat them early in the season too. The Packers should probably win 0-6 in the NFC North, but obviously the blocked field goal ruined that. But yeah, I'm pretty happy. If anyone else has any thoughts about the game, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do agree with you for the most part. I think I agree in regard to like the whole starters and personnel grouping for Green Bay in this matchup. I think it's overlooked that the whole Washington and Dallas game was really kind of the game that decided the seeding purposes. Looking back on it now, uh, but it did feel nice at some point to kind of have that belief that we beat this game, and in turn, it's messing with Green Bay's playoff chances. I feel like they would have fared a lot better if they had to play someone other than Philadelphia in the first round. But now, obviously, that is the case. So it is nice that we were able to put them in that position, or at least believe that. Um, but yeah, just nice to get that losing streak off our back and kind of move forward with a clean slate in regards to that record and with a new coaching staff moving forward. Isaac, did you have anything else regarding this Green Bay game?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have time to watch the actual game, but I did go through the highlights after and looking at what people were talking about in regards to the game. Like Joe mentioned, it doesn't really feel like we beat Green Bay just because Jordan Love was injured most of the game. They had a lot of injuries on both sides of the ball. But it did feel nice regardless to finally beat Green Bay, especially in Lambeau Field. The one thing I do want to touch upon that I think would be such a good note to take coming out of the off or into the offseason is the last drive. Caleb Williams saw that they were doing a single coverage on DJ Moore and with no outside help. And so when they called the final timeout, he got everyone in the huddle and was telling DJ like, if they do that again, like look, like get open and I'll look for you. And that's basically what happened. So that 3rd and 11, they had the three wide receivers. It was like Keenan, Rome, and someone else. They were all like in a straight line, and then DJ Moore was out by himself. And I think the cornerback is his last name is Valentine. I know Packers fans don't really like him a lot. I guess he's not as good. It was just single coverage over there, so Caleb was able to throw it to Moore. They had 2 seconds when they spiked the ball, and they were able to win the game. But for all those fans out there that are saying, Caleb doesn't have that clutch gene and he doesn't have the ability to win games. The Bears lost when the Bears lose this season, it wasn't because of Caleb. It was because of other outside factors. It was, the team or the coach not calling timeouts. I mean, there's parts in the games where, Caleb maybe took a bad sack or threw a pick, but just to have that happen in the last game going into the offseason, it's really nice to see. And we really just gotta get that head coaching hire right, because if we do, then the sky's the limit for Caleb Williams and the rest of the Bears team. But that's basically what I wanted to touch upon in the game against Green Bay.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. It's less of a win than we would have liked. If we could have got that one earlier in the year, that would have felt a lot better. Um, but I do agree, Joe. Now moving forward, it feels like, maybe we're not on a level playing field, but it feels like we've had a better chance to kind of even this rivalry than we have in the past few years, even decades. Um, but we can kind of move forward into the off season. And before we go too far into the off season, we are going to kind of give our season awards for every player, or certain characteristics and categories for each player that we think is deserving. Joe, I'll start with you. First off, I mean, you've got the list, but we can start off at the top. Your MVP of the season, and then after that, we can kind of you can go down the list, and then we'll move forward with that.
So, uh, it's, I mean, it's kind of hard. It wasn't okay. I'd say kind of hard, but picking an MVP for the Bears isn't the e- isn't is wasn't the easiest this year just because they didn't have a great season. But you kind of got to go with Caleb Williams just because even though he didn't have like the best of rookie seasons, he still set some Bears records. And yes, the Bears have never been a quarterback team. That's why he set them, but they're still important. And yeah, he didn't look great, like I said, a lot of the season. But like Isaac mentioned, he had a bunch of clutch game-winning drives. Now, a couple of them didn't actually matter because the Bears ended up squandering them or mismanaging the clock. But he still put us in positions to win games in the fourth quarter 3 or 4 times this year. Um, so I think he definitely deserves it. And there's a bunch of uh things to look at to be like, yeah, he's going to be a good a good, maybe even great quarterback in this league. I know a lot of people that aren't Bears fans and probably didn't watch all the Bears games, like just normal NFL fans, probably saw the big moments of Caleb this year, like on primetime TV, and are like, yeah, the Bears kind of ruined his rookie season. And yeah, that's partly true because he got sacked just 68 times. But he also did have those good moments, like I said, the driving down the field to win the games, uh, or put us in position to win the games. And he had a few really good throws, like that one to Keenan Allen a couple weeks ago. That was a tight window throw down the field. That was his. I don't want to say only long touchdown of the year, but I think it was like his second or third long touchdown of the year. But he did miss a bunch of deep throws this year, which you want to see improve. But still, he also went on that streak of no interceptions, which is, I know a lot of people wanted to pick at it that, and we're like, hey, he's not throwing on the field. And for some of that streak, he wasn't. But when Thomas Brown took over, he was, or yeah, when Thomas Brown took over, he was throwing more down the field, and he just wasn't getting picked off. Now, some of that was luck, but that's kind of how that streak works. You kind of got to get lucky sometimes. Um, but yeah, I just think he was the best Bear this year, even if there wasn't many to pick from. I'll pass it over to you, Isaac. Who's your most valuable Bear of the year?
So my MVP this year is Caleb Williams, like you, Joe. And to me, it's like this guy had over 4,000 yards, total yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And I'm basing this off the fact that he had to work with multiple offensive coordinators, all this coaching turnover. He had one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, and he was still able to do all this like in Chicago. We have such a bad history with quarterbacks, and for Caleb to come in here and do that is amazing. And I don't want to disregard any of the hard work that he did. I think one of the most impressive things about Caleb Williams this season was the fact that he got sacked 70 times and didn't miss a game. I feel like if any other quarterback would have been sacked 70 times, they probably would have missed at least a game or two. But kudos to Caleb for his resilience and his mental toughness because playing in Chicago when the Bears are not doing good is a tough place to play in. Regardless, it every seemed like after every press conference, he would say "bear down" or the Bears, and he would always just have such a positive mindset going into games, going out of games, no matter no matter what has happened. Never really blamed any of his teammates, never really blamed the coaches. It was just, I got to do better myself. And I really applaud him for that. And I'm super optimistic and excited to see how his career is going to go, especially next season. And like I said, the hope is just to get the offseason right. If we could get the head coaching hire right, we could get some free agent acquisitions, nail the draft, then this Bears team is going to look a lot different next season, and it's going to look a lot better under Caleb Williams. But I'll toss it over to you, Eli. Give us your MVP for this 2024 Bears season.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you guys. I think in terms, it's tough to pick any other player on this team, but I will just simply because um, I think it's an underrated thing on behalf of Jalen Johnson. Not only for the player that he is, but after that Lions game, the whole debacle between Matt Eberflus in the locker room, Jalen Johnson actually took the initiative to kind of speak out. Finally, someone on this Bears team took the initiative, and they were sick and tired of losing. And just, Eberflus's whole demeanor towards his own coaching mistakes and everything, Jalen stepped up and, was kind of the catalyst for Matt Eberflus getting fired. I know it sounds crazy to say, but I do think it's a big part of this season, a big storyline, and Jalen is a huge part of that. And not only again for his play on the field, but for that reason, he's my MVP this year. And I think Caleb is a great answer. And I think moving forward, not only for the Bears will he be an MVP, but potentially in the future maybe a league MVP. But we can kind of move forward with the next award, Joe. Once again, your biggest disappointment, kind of the polar opposite of this, the MVP, but your biggest disappointment for the Bears this season.
Hey, this is hard because I originally had Keenan Allen and I thought about it more, but Gerald Everett or I have Gerald Everett now. I think you can make a very strong case for Keenan Allen. Yeah, he almost set his career mark for touchdowns, but he dropped a bunch of balls. He was hurt for the first bit of the season. So I think you can make a pretty good case for Keenan Allen. But I'm going Gerald Everett just for the simple fact that we had at least some expectations that he would be a decent tight end and, catch some balls, take some heat off of Cole Kmet. Maybe not, you know, have 70% of the snaps like he did the first game of the season, but still help this offense. Yeah, he didn't do that at all. He dropped a bunch of balls. He didn't make a bunch. He didn't have like I don't think he even had 100 yards this year. He was a terrible blocker. He just didn't seem like he wanted to be here. Um, Now again, you might be able to blame that on Shane Waldron at the beginning half of the year, but also you gotta act like you actually want to play and be productive. He wasn't doing that. Like he just wasn't blocking. He, like I said, didn't catch. He wasn't making catches. He just wasn't doing. He didn't do anything of note this year, and then he still has 1 year, I think, left on his contract. I wouldn't be surprised if they cut him this offseason. Um, but yeah, that's my biggest disappointment. What about you, Isaac? Who's your biggest disappointment this year?
I wrote an article where I was talking about the Bear season awards and I put Montez Sweat, but when I was thinking about it, there are a lot of disappointments on this team. And I think Gerald Everett is such a good disappointment that we can that you highlighted, Joe. Um, and there's other guys on the list. There's, Ryan Bates has been a major disappointment in my eyes, but someone I do want to mention that I feel like people kind of forgot, but as soon as you hear the name, you're like, yep, like he was definitely the biggest disappointment. It's Nate Davis. And going back to when we signed him in free agency, I was really excited because I thought Nate Davis was going to be a really good player for us. I really liked him in Tennessee, and I'm not discrediting his play in Tennessee. He was actually a really good guard. But the fact that people were kind of telling polls like this guy does has issues of he doesn't really like practicing, and there's reports like Vrabel didn't really like Nate Davis, and yet polls still signed him. It's kind of wild. And the reason why I think he's one of the most disappointing players is because we really needed him to be good this season. He was a starter on the offensive line. He was our right guard. And for him to not only not do well, but to be cut mid-season when we're paying him, $10 million or more a year, it's extremely disappointing. So hopefully Post can get this right in free agency or the draft. We'll see. But Nate Davis is my biggest disappointment. And I'll toss it over to you, Eli. Who's your biggest disappointment on this Bears team this season?
So you guys took it in the direction of basically players that underperformed, and I think I'm going to go in more of the health wise situation, and I'm going to go with Jaquan Brisker just simply because headed into this season, you know, the secondary was the focal point of this defense. Everybody talked about how good it was going to be, and a top five unit defensively overall. Jaquan Brisker was playing very well for the first few weeks of the season, and then in that Carolina game, he got banged up and he never saw the field for the rest of the year. And we all thought this was going to be another year where Jaquan Brisker took that step and solidified himself as a strong safety on this team. But health wise, he just hasn't been there. And to me, that's the biggest disappointment defensively on this team. And again, you guys had great answers as well. There are several candidates for this award, unfortunately, for this Bears team, but not for his level of play, but just his availability this season. I guess it's going to be Jaquan Brisker for me, unfortunately. But we will stick to the defensive side for this next award. Defensive Player of the Year, Joe. Who do you have for this award on this Bears team?
So there's really only a couple of candidates for this. You could Jalen Johnson is definitely a candidate for this. You could maybe make an argument for Javon Dexter, even though he didn't have a great season besides like the first couple games. Um, but you could maybe make an argument for Kyler Gordon, but I'm gonna go with TJ Edwards. He just every game he played like what was he played with an energy that not a lot of players played with. Like when things fell off the rails after Eberflus got fired, he still was playing hard. You couldn't say a lot of the now at the end of the year, like then on Sunday against the Packers, everyone was playing hard, but like against the Niners and the game after that, a couple you could most players kind of look like they weren't playing that hard. TJ Edwards didn't look like that. He looked like he was playing hard every snap that he took. He actually wanted to be on that field. He wanted to win games. I'm not claiming that they didn't want to win games because I'm sure they all wanted to win, but it just seemed like for a couple weeks after Eberflus got fired, even though that's what they all wanted, the players weren't playing as hard as they were when Eberflus was there, at least for the first half of the season. So my answer is TJ Edwards. How about you, Isaac? Who was your defensive player of the year?
TJ Edwards, man, I love that guy. I feel like he's definitely Ryan Pohl's best free agent signing, but my guy is gonna be Jalen Johnson, the obvious one, and it's multiple reasons. So like first, he's the only Pro Bowler to make the from the Bears this season, and without him, I think the defense would look a lot different, especially with all the problems with Tyreek Stevenson. But two things I want to highlight. One that Eli already mentioned was the fact that Jalen Johnson was one of the only players to really call out Matt Eberflus after that Lions game, which I will forever respect him for that because I was so sick of Matt Eberflus as our head coach. And without Jalen Johnson doing that, I'm pretty sure maybe Flus would have still been the head coach for at least a couple more weeks. And the second thing was at the end of the or when Christian Watson got hurt in the Packers game, he was a guy that immediately like called the medical staff. I think he was praying for him. And a lot of Packers fans noticed this. They were saying, a rivalry aside, like he's gained my respect and stuff like that. I have a Packers friend. He texted me a video of that happening, and he's like, "Oh, I actually like Jalen Johnson a lot more now than I did before." But there's just so many things like we gave Jalen Johnson a massive contract last season, and he's still playing like one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. And the fact that he's probably not going to even get second team All Pro just because the Bears tax and the NFL doesn't really seem to value Chicago Bears players, and fans don't. I could see on like I see on like X, on Twitter, on TikTok that a lot of fans are saying, Jalen Johnson is actually one of the best cornerbacks. We think he's underrated, and I'm a Bucks fan, a Seahawks fan, and stuff like that. But Jalen Johnson's my defensive MVP or player of the year. Eli, give me your defensive player of the year for the Bears.
Yeah, so obviously, yeah, Jalen Johnson is that dude on this Bears defense. That's a no-brainer. Um, and TJ Edwards is also a great pick. No arguments there for me. I think, and this one's tough for me just because, as you kind of mentioned, guys, there's not a whole lot of players this season that stood out on this Bears defense. But I think if Andrew Billings stayed healthy for this year, I think he would have been the guy. And, it's tough for me to give him that award just because, obviously he wasn't healthy for the entire season. So I'm not going to give him the award just because, again, availability. But, I think Kyler Gordon is a guy we've talked about multiple times throughout this year, who was banged up a bit throughout the season, but overall played most of the year. And he's just a firecracker. That guy is all over the field and can play wherever you put him, whether it's in the blitz, putting him at nickel or lining him up outside. He's been up to the task in his entire time with the Bears. So I'm going to give Kyler Gordon my Defensive Player of the Year award. And we will switch gears to the offensive side of the ball. Joe, your Offensive Player of the Year for Chicago.
So, uh, before I get to the offensive player of the year, I do, uh, I do like that you mentioned Andrew Billings for the defense. There is a really good argument, even though he missed most of the year, that he could be the defensive player of the year for the Bears. Uh, but I'll move on to the offense. Now, like I said earlier, this is kind of hard because the offense wasn't really that good this year, obviously. Um, so you really can't pick many people out. Uh, like I guess if you want to, you could say Keenan Allen, but I don't think he really has an argument. You can't really make an argument for Rome because he messed up a couple times, a lot this year. DJ Moore is my pick, but again, he didn't have a good start to the year. Him and Caleb weren't on the same page at all. Once they fired Waldron, they got more on the same page, and DJ Moore started doing more of everything. Now, do I love that Thomas Ron kept calling screens to DJ Moore for the four times he was, or for the four games that he was head coach? No, I got really annoyed with it really quickly, but we're getting him the ball, which is all that matters because he's a good player. They were also getting him the ball out of the backfield, which is which was nice to see for the first like 4 or 5 times they did it, and then that got old too because he wasn't going anywhere because teams knew what was coming. Uh, but again, that's not his fault. That's the coaching's fault. Uh, but yeah, I think my offensive player there is probably DJ Moore. What about you, Isaac?
So my offensive player of the year for the Bears is gonna go to Darnell Wright. And I just want anyone that's listening to this, try to picture the Bears offensive line without Darnell Wright. It's not good at all. And I really give a lot of respect to Darnell Wright because you know what? In the beginning of the season, he looked like he was regressing a little bit, and I was really concerned. Like, did Poles make the wrong decision drafting him at pick 10? Maybe they should have actually taken Jalen Carter, but he did bounce back in a big way. He ended this season as PFF's fifth highest graded right tackle, PFF's third highest graded run blocking right tackle, and then PFF's 10th highest graded pass blocking right tackle. And then he was one of the top 16 right tackles overall, according to PFF. So to me, I definitely feel like Darnell Wright deserves offensive player of the year. And I hope that in year 3, he's able to continue to grow, especially with someone I hope is better next to him at right guard. I mean, all the like Nate Davis would constantly maybe start, he'll not start. There'll be random people. Matt Pryor will be in, or maybe Tevin Jenkins slid over for a couple games. And Ryan Bates played a little bit there. So, I mean, just got to give it to Darnell Wright for that one. But Eli, who's your offensive player of the year for the Bears?
So I'm going to go with Caleb Williams. I know you guys gave him the MVP, so I think it's only right that he gets some consideration in my awards. This guy was just, as you kind of laid it out, Isaac, just so mature in the face of every possible adverse situation that the Bears were put in this year. And for a rookie, for him to come in and for everyone leading up to the draft and when he was drafted, talking about character concerns and he's this and he's that, he didn't display any of that this season. At times maybe he looked frustrated, but I think that was more so just for his passion of the game and wanting to bring wins to the Chicago Bears. And for him to put up the numbers he did as a rookie and the limited turnovers that he had as a rookie, when it was a big concern coming out of college, his ability to hang on to the football and things like that, he just came out and looked the part. And I think at the beginning of the year, if Bears fans, if you asked them if he had thrown for 20 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, I think any Bears fan would take that. So I'm going to give Caleb Williams my Offensive Player of the Year award. And Joe, we will move on to you, your most underrated Chicago Bear of this season.
So this is kind of hard because, like, if you're a Bears fan and you watch every game, I don't think you can really say that anyone was really underrated because you rate them as you watch them, I guess. But for the rest of the NFL universe, you probably don't really know who Jack Sanborn is because unless you're a Bears fan, you don't really hear that name because he's really never on the field. But whenever he was on the field for the Bears, he made plays and he made sure to get his name called. So you gotta just for that, I think you gotta go Jack Sanborn. Um, I think he'll be good. I don't know if the Bears are gonna resign him, but wherever he goes, if he gets a starting opportunity, I think he will be good. At least a good linebacker, maybe even a great one after leaving Chicago, which sucks because I don't like giving up great players, but Ryan Poles gave that big contract to Tremaine Edmonds. Uh, so yeah, I'm gonna go with Jack Sanborn. What about you, Isaac? Who was your most underrated Bear this year?
I hope they re-sign Jack Sanborn, but my underrated player of the year for the Bears has to be Kyler Gordon, and Eli already kind of talked about him as his defensive player of the year, but this guy, I absolutely love watching Kyler Gordon play. He's probably one of my top 3 favorite Bears right now, and I'm hoping I can buy a jersey eventually for him, but he was actually so good this season. He was everywhere on the field. He can make any play. He essentially is one of the best nickel corners in the NFL. He makes any tackle. He could guard basically any wide receiver. And maybe I'm being a little over exaggerating, but uh, he was such a joy to watch and a defense that had a lot of problems. So hopefully the Bears can re-sign him. I think he is available for a contract extension this season. So he does have one more year left in his rookie deal, so hopefully the Bears can figure something out because we need to keep him on the team for as long as possible. But Eli, who is your most underrated player of the year award for the Bears?
I'm going to go with Terrell Smith, just simply because, again, we saw the whole Washington debacle with Tyreek Stevenson, and we've seen him struggle throughout this season in general. But in the times that Terrell Smith has filled in for Tyreek at cornerback too, I think for the most part, he's excelled. And I think that he's still got a lot to prove, and there's still a lot of potential with Terrell Smith. And again, we've kind of talked about it in past episodes, but if you remember, prior to their first years, Terrell Smith and Tyreek Stevenson in training camp were fighting for that cornerback 2 spot. And Terrell Smith, for the longest time, had the edge. And then I believe he had a hamstring injury. And that kind of solidified Tyreek cornerback 2. So, if that had never happened, regardless of where they were drafted, maybe Terrell Smith would be cornerback 2. But it is interesting, that whole conversation. But I will give Terrell Smith my most underrated player of the Bears for this season. And Isaac, I will start with you this time. Your rookie of the year for this Chicago Bears rookie draft class.
Well, there's not a lot of rookies to choose from, but I mean, also technically Caleb Williams would be my rookie of the year as well. But I'm gonna give it to Tory Taylor just because he's been quietly one of the better punters in this league. He actually broke the franchise record for both net and gross punting averages. So net was 41.6 and gross was 47.7. Um, and a lot of people were kind of making fun of the Ryan Poles for drafting a punter in the fourth round. They're like, "Oh, this the Bears had so many other needs, and you can make yes, like the Bears had a lot of other needs and stuff like that." But I think it was a valid pick just because we had a lot of problems at punting last year with Trenton Gill, and I feel like I mean, I don't feel like I know that Tory Taylor was the obvious top punter in last year's draft. So at least it wasn't a situation where the Bucks drafted kicker Roberto Aguirre, I think his name was. He was in the second round, and he ended up being a bust. So happy to have Tory on my team, and maybe next season he's gonna break even more records. But Joe, who is your rookie of the year for the Bears?
Yeah, there's only real two rookies to choose from here. It's either Caleb Williams or Corey Taylor. Uh, I mean, both of them I think are really good. Um, I guess I'm gonna go with Caleb if you have to pull my finger on it. Um, I mean, just I don't want to repeat what I said for the offensive player or the MVP, the most valuable player for the Bears of the year. But it's basically all the same things I said for that is the reason that Caleb's my rookie of the year for the Bears. How about you, Eli? Who's your rookie of the year for the Bears?
Yeah, those to most people are the top two options. And I think, Rome deserves at least a little bit of consideration. Now, I'm not going to give it to him, but I think it was just evident throughout times this season that Caleb and Rome just weren't on the same page. And that just comes with time. But Rome he has a great route running ability. At times in the 50-50 ball, I remember that catch in the corner of the end zone against the 49ers. That was a beautiful 50-50 ball. And I think it's a sign of what's to come with these two. And again, I'm not going to give Rome the award. And I'm certainly not going to give it to Karan Amagaji. But, um, it is a tough conversation. And I've already given Caleb the Offensive Player of the Year award. So I'm just going to give it to not for what he displayed on the field this year, but for the potential that I think this player has. I'm going to give it to Austin Booker just because he at times showed some flashes this season. And if he had stayed in college another year, I think he'd be a first or second round draft pick this season. Just because he was a raw prospect coming out this season. But I think he was a steal. And for the Bears to trade up back into the draft to get him, I think he's going to be an underrated part of this defense next year with a full year under his belt and a new staff to kind of aid him in his upward trend. So not for his play, but for his potential, I'm going to give it to Austin Booker. And we will move on to our final award, Most Improved. Joe, who is your most improved Chicago Bear of 2024?
I don't think anybody is going to argue with this. It's Javon Dexter. Uh, like I said, he started off the season really hot. Uh, he obviously cooled off through the second half of the season. He didn't get as many sacks. I think his pressure rate probably went a little bit down. But for the first like 4 or 5 weeks, he had like 5 sacks and was pressuring the quarterback a lot up the middle. That was really nice to see. And he needs to obviously build off that going in the next year. Uh, but I think he does have what it takes to be that uh guy next to Andrew Billings and that pass rush in the middle. Um, but I obviously don't know because I'm not as in tuned with like watching the defensive line when they are run defense. But I would say that he definitely probably needs to get better at run defense because if not, the Bears might need to sign another guy, another D tackle this year in free agency to be that other run defender next to Andrew Billings when he gets back, just because our run defense was not good, and it was only good when Billings was in. And that's I know you mentioned that he could have been an underrated candidate for the most either the most valuable bear or just the most underrated bear. I don't remember actually exactly which award you said it was before, but still, I do think uh when he's Andrew Billings is the dude that is the reason your run defense is good. You need to fix the run defense in general. But yeah, uh, with for this most improved Bears, I'm gonna go with Trevon Dexter. How about you, Isaac? Who's your most improved Bear?
So my most improved bear of the season has to be Zach Pickens. I'm just kidding. Not Zach Pickens, but I am gonna say someone who I had my doubts, and I actually didn't think he was gonna do pretty or do well at all, and he ended up playing pretty nicely for the Bears, and that's Jonathan Owens. So with Brisker out, Owens basically had. Oh, well, first it was Elijah Hicks that stepped in, and then Hicks got hurt, and then Jonathan Owens stepped in, and he actually did pretty nice for the Bears. I mean, week one he had that touchdown and the block punt against the Tennessee Titans, and he when I'm watching the Bears defense throughout the season, I didn't really see any problems from him. Like he didn't really have any holding calls or just gave up a touchdown like that. He played pretty decently. So I mean, it's kind of hard to explain because he wasn't technically or well, he wasn't on the Bears last season. He was on the Packers. So maybe not a lot of Bears fans really knew how good he was prior to coming to Chicago, but with the Packers, he was never really a starter. He was kind of more like a bench or a depth piece. But for the Bears, he did play a decent amount of games as a starter. So kudos to him. And if Simone Biles, you're watching this, your husband played really well. So thanks for that. But Eli, give us your most improved player on this Bears team.
So this is kind of a random one, but I just thought of it a little bit ago. I'm gonna give this to Roshan Johnson just because I think in the run game, he was already, I believe, the best pass blocker in that backfield. And I think he did an even better job than he did his rookie season. Um, whether that's the run blocking, as I mentioned, or picking up critical third downs or goal line carries. Most of the time when he was given the ball, he answered the call, and I think it was an underrated part of this year. DeAndre Swift, obviously the feature back, kind of, I would say we could all agree, disappointed this season. Um, but when Roshan Johnson was given the ball, more times than not, it was a positive play, which says a lot about a running back too. And for them to have the confidence in him to trade away Khalil Herbert, I think just shows you what they think of him. And I think the sky's the limit for him as running back too. And whatever they decide to do uh, with Swift in this offseason, I don't think they'll move on from him, obviously, but it's an interesting conversation moving forward with the usage rates between those two. So I'll give that one to Roshan Johnson. That kind of wraps up the awards as well. I did have a few names that came to mind for other awards. If you guys also have some, Joe, you kind of sprung it upon me. Tremaine Edmonds for most disappointing player, just because of the size of his contract. I think he has underperformed this season. Last season, I think he wasn't a bad player. I don't think he lived up to the contract either, but we're 2 years in now, and I don't think he is living up to what we've paid him so far. Did you guys have any other names that came to mind for any of these awards?
Yeah, I mean, for the most disappointing, I Isaac didn't talk about it for this award, but he did mention his name. Zach Pickens definitely most probably he could be a candidate for that, just because he didn't really take any steps to become a better player this year. So it kind of looks like a third round bust, which is not the only third round bust that pulls his head.
And then I have one for the best free agent acquisition. I think it's Kevin Byard. And at first I was pretty skeptical about it because he's 31 years old and I was like, "Oh, what are we doing? We should have signed a younger guy." But he actually had a really good season for the Bears. He was one of the main leaders on the team. He was third in the NFL among safeties in total tackles. He had that really nice sack against Malik Willis in that last game against Green Bay. So shout out to Kevin Byard, and I really, I actually like the signing, and he has one more year with us, so hopefully he continues to play at that form next season.
I just want to add this. Uh, I don't know how how positive the he has was either you said either best in the team in tacklers or third in the league
He
in
was
tackles for
third,
safety.
yeah.
It's if
Mhm.
that I don't really know if that's exactly a good thing because that just means that the Bears let up a bunch of big plays. He was the one that was chasing people down to tackle people, but still nonetheless, I do agree with you that he was a good free agent acquisition because I didn't think it was going to be good this year.
I think just one more before we move on to our next topic, and I don't think it's any fault of his own, but Cole Kmet was supposed to be a focal point of this offense this season. And at times, there was a stretch to where he was involved and the offense looked a lot better. But again, in true Bears fashion, we went away from what worked offensively. And the last few weeks of the season, or better yet, the second half of the season, I would say, he just wasn't involved. So, not any fault of his own. I would say Cole Kmet is another big disappointment for this 2024 season. But we will get into what everybody's been talking about lately, and that is the head coaching search for the Chicago Bears. And the way we'll do this is obviously we'll talk about these candidates, but we'll go ahead and list off um, most of, if not all, the candidates that have been listed for the Chicago Bears who they've requested to interview. This is per Yahoo Sports, so blame them, not me, if they're missing a name. Aaron Glenn, obviously of the Detroit Lions, Mike Vrabel, former Tennessee Titans head coach, Brian Flores, Arthur Smith, Pete Carroll, Ben Johnson, the hot name there. Mike McCarthy was requested, but was denied by the Dallas Cowboys. So if that's any indication to where they're moving forward, yeah, I agree with you, Isaac. Not a fan of that one. Thomas Brown is also going to have an interview with the Bears, the interim head coach. Anthony Weaver of the Miami Dolphins, Mike Kafka, not a great name for me as well. Drew Petzing, the OC for the Arizona Cardinals. Mike Kafka was the New York Giants offensive coordinator. Todd Munkin, a name I actually kind of like, the Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator. And then we get into the kind of the weird ones. David Shaw, Broncos senior personnel executive and former head coach at the University of Stanford, and Matt Campbell, the head coach for the Iowa State Cyclones. So kind of a weird list, in my opinion. There are some quality candidates on this list. And the way we'll kind of get into this is we will say our favorite name, our favorite hire, I would say, our most disappointing hire, and our dark horse candidate. Joe, if you've got your names ready, we will start with you with this list of head coaching candidates for the Bears.
Yeah, I'll start. But I want to start with I think they're interviewing way too many people. Uh, they did this last year the with the with the office coordinator. Yeah, I think they interviewed about 12 people, and then somehow they came to the conclusion that Sam Waldron would be the best hire, and we all obviously know how that worked out. So this is scary because they might repeat it. They might repeat themselves. Well, let's hope they don't, but they might. Um, but to your questions, obviously the best hire here, or the one that most people want is Ben Johnson. I don't know if he would be. We don't know really if he'd be the best hire. We assume he would be because of that the hot OC candidate, but we don't know really if he would be the best hire. But let's just say for this exercise he is. Um, it's either him or Vrabel. Although it seems like Vrabel is going to end up in New England because the Patriots fired Rod Mayo, which I didn't see coming, and I think it's kind of a dumb move because he was only there 1 year and you didn't really give him time to do anything. But again, Vrabel was a former Patriot; he won Super Bowls with them. I think they really like. I I I think Robert Kraft likes Vrabel and wants him to be their head coach, even though apparently they want to move away from the Belichick way, and that's kind of what Vrabel is. Uh, he's a lesser version of Belichick, obviously, but he's learned from Belichick, so it's probably a bunch of the same principles. So it'll be actually interesting to see if he does land there. He's interviewing with them on Thursday. Many people expect him to interview with them and then get the job right away, but we'll see if that actually happens. Um, I think the most disappointing hire. I don't. That's a tough question. I would. probably say uh Mike Kafka just because the Giants offense hasn't been great. Uh they got the ball out to Malik Neighbors this year, which is good. He was their best player, obviously. And I know it's not totally his fault. And I also think Brian Dable, it's probably mostly Brian Dable's offense, because he was the OC obviously in Buffalo before he came over. So he probably calls the plays and you just need to have an offensive coordinator on staff. Um so that, but they also didn't have a quarterback and all that stuff. But I think he might be my most disappointing hire. Um, then I guess, see, my issue is I should be saying this. You don't know much about many of these names. Uh, I guess my dark horse would be Matt Campbell though, because the Cyclones did really good this year. Now, I'm not saying I want the Bears to hire a head coach out of college. I'm not saying that at all. But Cyclones played really well this year, which hurts me to say because I'm uh Iowa Hawkeyes fan and they beat us this year. Um, so uh, but yeah, they played really well this year. So it would be, and from the little bit I read on him, it seems like he has an offense that might translate well to the NFL. So um, he'd be my dark horse candidate. I'll pass it over to you, Isaac. Uh, what are your thoughts on these three top coaches?
So I agree with you, Joe. I think the Bears are interviewing way too many candidates, and I do like how teams try to get different opinion or different mind, like look at different coaching options. But I think this is just too many. We shouldn't hire a coach from college football. First of all, I'm not really a college football guy. I don't really know much about Matt Campbell, but I think if the Bears were to hire someone from college football, I don't even know what they would be doing, honestly. And there's a lot of good candidates, a lot of people that I wouldn't mind end up, yeah, if they were to become the Bears head coach, I would be okay with it. But the obvious one is Ben Johnson. And people are saying, you know what, we don't know how this guy's gonna be as a head coach, but I feel like I've seen enough of how he treats his players, how the players talk about him, how he's um led the Lions offense for the last 3 seasons, even though the Lions have a lot of talent. Um, I would rather take the risk and hire Ben Johnson and see what he's made of. And I think even if he were to be like a bust or not as good as we initially thought, I wouldn't really be mad because you know what? He was the best head coaching candidate in this cycle. Like no one's gonna argue with anyone on that. A lot of people think that he's the top guy. So Ben Johnson's my, top hire. For my most disappointing hire, there's a couple guys that I'm like, why are we even interviewing them? Like Eli, you mentioned Mike Kafka. I don't know why we would interview him. Joe, you're talking about Matt Campbell. I'm sure like you guys said, he was a good head coach in college, but I just don't know why we would interview him. But one of the guys I do want to highlight is Anthony Weaver, the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. I don't know what Ryan Poles and the rest of that Bears front office are doing by looking at that Dolphins defense this season and thinking we need to hire their defensive coordinator. Um, Weaver is just not a guy I think is ready to become a head coach yet. Maybe you know what, he was a good defensive coordinator. I'm not sure, but the Dolphins defense was definitely not as good as they were supposed to be this season. But for dark horse candidates, I kind of have three guys that I'm juggling around in my mind, and I think I'll end up just choosing one of them. So the three guys I have are Aaron Glenn, Todd Monken, and Pete Carroll. And I think I'm gonna just say Pete Carroll just for this conversation because I feel like my opinion will probably change in a couple days. But Pete Carroll did say that if he were to get the Bears head coaching job, he would have top assistants in line for that. Like he would have, high profile guys and different positions. So that gives me some hope if the Bears were to hire Pete Carroll. But the thing is, he is really old. I don't know how much longer he could be a head coach. But I do, he is a winner. Like he was really good at USC. He won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. I am happy that the Bears are at least gonna interview him, just to get, kind of pick his brain and stuff like that. But if they were to actually hire him as a head coach, I would probably be disappointed at first, and then maybe if we see who he ends up bringing on his coaching staff, it would be interesting. Like, okay, maybe this was a good hire. So those are my options. And Joe, did you have something you wanted to point out?
Yeah, I I just wanted to say I agree with you. I probably should have put Pete Carroll as my part of my dark horse candidate because I wanted to have a problem with Pete Carroll uh becoming our head coach. Like you mentioned, he is old, so they need to have a succession plan for him. But he's a winner. He should technically have two Super Bowls, but we all know how he messed up and not running the ball with Marshawn Lynch. No one understands that still. Uh, they can explain it as many times as they want. No one's going to understand it because we had the best running back in the game and he still didn't freaking run the ball with him on the 1 yard line. Doesn't make sense. But yeah, I would be okay with the Pete Carroll hire just because you we would need to know what's gonna happen after he retires. But yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Eli, real quick for uh your thoughts on these candidates.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and just say my dark horse because we're on that topic. It was Pete Carroll, just simply because, I think right now the Bears are in full trying to figure out what the best option is mode, and whether that's proven experience with Pete Carroll, whether it's a young offensive mind that's up and coming in this league and Ben Johnson. I do appreciate the fact that it seems at the very least they're trying to get information from every walk of football, whether it's at the personnel executive level, whether it's from college, whether it's a proven track record. It seems like they're at least doing their due diligence. And I had sent you guys a message that I had liked the process that they were in interviewing all these candidates. But now I do agree that it seems like they are fishing on dry land, I guess is the way to put it, with these last few names, Drew Petzing, Mike Kafka. Those guys just don't I don't know what you're trying to do with candidates like that. It just doesn't make sense to me. But the no-brainer, again, we might kind of mentioned it earlier. Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel to me are the two that, like, if you don't get Ben Johnson, try to pursue Vrabel. And if you don't get either of those guys, then we're in a pretty tough spot. Again, I mentioned my dark horse was Pete Carroll. And going through this list, I guess my most disappointing hire was similar to you, Isaac. Any of those guys, the Mike Kafkas, the Drew Petzings, any of these guys that are with teams currently that just didn't look great offensively, that's not what we need. But yeah, those are kind of my three. Two other names that I forgot to mention or weren't on this list. I believe per Adam Schefter, the Bears did ask Joe Brady to be interviewed. So that's another big name in this hiring cycle. Liam Cohen, as far as I know, has not been requested by the Bears to be interviewed. So maybe in the coming days, that's another name to watch out for because there is still time. But those are two higher quality candidates in this cycle that, I would like if they interviewed Cohen just to get some information. But Joe, if you have something, go ahead.
No, sorry. Uh, I know I've already mentioned two dark horses. I just because no one brought him up. I think it's important to bring up Brian Flores as a dark horse, or even maybe uh, I don't want to call him a slam dunk candidate, but some people might. Um, but I would call him at least a dark horse to get the job. I think he's probably number three. If you were to list out everybody that, like the first two are obviously Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel. I think a lot of people's number three is probably Brian Flores. Um, now everybody knows how it fell apart in um Miami because um he didn't like Tua and he didn't think Tua was ready to play. And that's why they were doing that Fitzpatrick and Tua switching almost every game uh, when Tua was a rookie. But this was a step that I didn't realize. Uh, but for a team that was actively trying to tank when he was there, he got them to a 500 record as a head coach. So he's not a bad head coach. He just things fell apart there in Miami with Tua and the allegations of them trying to get Tom Brady. So yeah, the Bears will have to figure out like uh what exactly went wrong, see if Flores would actually fit here, and and more importantly, Flores would need to actually like Caleb Williams. But I think he's a darker candidate and probably the top darker candidate for the job.
Yeah, that is a huge name that we kind of neglected to mention and has been connected with the Bears and, the whole Ryan Poles college roommate kind of thing. We've seen in the past that Ryan Poles prioritizes those past relationships. So it would not surprise me in the slightest if he were at least a finalist for the job. So thank you, Joe, for bringing that back up because it is noteworthy for sure. But do you guys have anything else to mention with any of these head coaching candidates or the season as a whole? I know this is our first off-season episode, so kind of recapping everything. You guys have anything else to mention? All right, so an interesting part of the off season, we're past Black Monday. Several coaches, GMs, and everything have been let go, and it's an interesting part of the off season. One more head coaching candidate that is out there, Matt Nagy. No, I'm kidding. he has been interviewed by the New York Jets. So in case you were curious, his name has been a hot commodity out there for maybe yet another potential head coaching gig for the former Bears head coach in Matt Nagy. But with that being said, please be sure to go like all of our reels, TikToks, everything having to do with our content. Check out these guys on Twitter. They write great articles, great content to be had there on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. But again, go like us, follow our content, watch these episodes. We would greatly appreciate it. But with that being said, this has been the Bear Down Buzz podcast. We thank you for watching, and we will see you moving forward now, I believe, on Thursdays once a week. That is the plan moving forward for the offseason. So until next episode, we will see you next time.